Well, hello, hello. It's Rebecca Happy here at the Coffee Money Show in our success series of interviews. And today we're speaking with international speaker and best-selling author and the creator of The Day of Life, KellieFrazier. And she's going to talk to us today about overcoming limiting beliefs and creating self-belief to be fully empowered as you blast into this world. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us today, Kellie. I'm so happy to be talking to you.
Thank you. It's very much my honor to be here. Seriously, Rebecca. I love what you're doing, first of all, and have I ever told you how much I love your name? Just the name Happy. That's awesome. So thank you very much for having me here.
So maybe if you want to just tell us a little bit of your history and sort of why higher learning. You've done a lot of work in sort of relearning and reestablishing sort of your whole mindset because of this huge accident that happened to you, several years ago.
Yes, indeed. All right, so let me just tell you what happened in 2007. I am into higher learning. There's no question about that. And I believe with all my heart that great leadership really begins with being a great student. And so I had to become a student in ways that I never anticipated. In 2007, I had an 18-year-old nephew who really just wanted to make a difference in the world. And he talked to me a few times about this. He said, you know, Aunt Kellie, I don't care if it's just bending down, tying a shoe of a 5-year-old little girl, or if it's really helping someone to move forward in their life. I just want to help people. I was so inspired by that, Rebecca. I just thought, you know, what proceeds in a 17-year-old or 18-year-old person's mind to really want to make a difference like that, you know? So unfortunately, I got a call from his mom and in 2007 who told me that he died in a drowning accident. Now that was devastating for us, all of us as a family. That was certainly not something that we could easily get over based on just how amazing this young man was. But then a few months later, his mom also died of cancer, and she was my little sister. And so that really kind of created like this spiral for me. Now, I was living in Michigan at the time, and they were living in Vermont. And in that, during that time of taking care of, the funeral arrangements, going through the funeral services, as well as the cancer, a lot of the travel back and forth really created an issue for my husband, who was back home trying to run our family business, which was an investing company, a very successful one at the time, as well as our teenage daughter. Now, what happened at the end of that year, when I kind of thought that things were turning around after a little while, I had to close the family business when I got back because it was kind of faltering when I wasn't there to try to run it, and my husband was, and just didn't have enough communication. So I ended up in an accident that caused a brain injury at the end of that year, and it was the most challenging year of my entire life thus far, and I really feel where I sit today that it was probably the greatest year in some ways than I've ever experienced too. So let me explain. When I started to have seizures, I had 9 or 10 seizures a day. A lot of times my husband thought that I was having a stroke whenever I would have a seizure because the entire right side of my body would go limp like a paralysis. Sometimes the seizures would last for 3 minutes, sometimes they would last for 3 days. I never knew, he never knew. It was really challenging. So there was a lot that I had to relearn because when you have a brain injury, your comprehension is sometimes at a toddler level, at least mine was, and sometimes it's not even there. So there was a lot of things that I had to relearn, and the education that I needed to have was coming from a lot of children's books, believe it or not. I hid that fact. I did not want people to know that I was learning from children's books. This pride, but that was really where it was coming from. So here's what happened. 6 months after that accident, we're now in June of 2008, I remember going to bed one night, and I have a very deep spiritual walk. And so I just started praying, and I said, look, I know you can heal me. I don't know why you haven't yet, but I know you can. And if this is what it's going to be like when I wake up tomorrow morning, I don't want to wake up. Now, what I did at that point, Rebecca, was just kind of like surrendered. I just kind of gave up. I could not deal with the pain anymore. I could not deal with the seizures anymore. Let me tell you one funny story before I go into what happened that morning. when I would have seizures, you never knew where they were going to take place. But I remember one specific time when I went into Walmart with my husband, and I told him, I said, honey, I feel like I'm going to have a seizure. He said, okay. And by now, we're so used to these things. He goes, okay, let me go and sit you down in this little cafe that Walmart has. So he plops me in the chair. I begin the
Well, it looks like we're just about to lose Kellie, and as you know, sometimes we get technical issues here and things crash. But when she comes back, we'll hear her story.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so you're back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Where did I end off?
And you were going into Walmart with your husband, and you were used to this kind of thing, and you said you gave him the heads up, and then.
Right. Okay. So the next thing I knew, I woke up and I had two women staring at me. They were elderly women. They're both staring at me this far away from my face. And my eyes are really big, and I'm looking with my head back like this. And one of them goes, do you think we should call an ambulance? And the other woman goes, I don't know. Is she okay? And my eyes are wide open, and I'm like, I'm okay. I'm okay. And I turn around and look, and here comes my husband with an entire full cart of groceries. He left me there and just went around the shop shopping. He left, and there was a whole cart of groceries sitting there. I couldn't believe it. So, okay, so here's what happens when I wake up the next morning after I had this desire to just surrender. I see this bright light at the end of my bed, and my feet went around the corner. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming, if this was just my brain, but truly, this was an experience that I'll never forget, and this is where my entire journey began. I started to see in my mind images of my writing books, of becoming a public speaker, of meeting people all around the world. And Rebecca, if you had known me back then, nobody would have ever guessed that I would be sitting in the position that I am today, because I never did a journal or a diary when I was a kid. I hated writing. I could not stand public speaking. So all of these limiting thoughts were in my mind all the time until that morning. When that morning occurred, there was nothing in my mind that was a limitation until when I saw these things, I just asked the question, how? How is any of that supposed to happen? What I heard back in my spirit was, trust me. That's what I heard. And I said, okay, you know. And at that point, the seizures were almost minimal. They weren't completely gone, but almost minimal. I rarely had seizures after that. I did not have any more of the paralysis. All these things that I had been experiencing, the tremendous pain every day, gone. And I just thought, okay, this is a whole new start, a whole new beginning, and I am not going to go back. So I began to learn different aspects of how to actually create this image that I saw in my mind. The first thing was writing books. How do you do that? So I began this journey of learning from other people who were gurus, never people who were in my own category, always people who had high expertise and high education. And those were the people that I decided to learn from that point on. Kind of a long story.
For most people, they're not going to have such a dramatic intervention in their life with an accident with like a year long of ongoing seizures and all that. But there must have been other smaller steps within that helped you kind of shift. Like when you said there was shame initially when you were reading books and that, and so you didn't want people to know. So how would you tune out the shame or the you could never be a writer? I mean, you know. You never liked it. How did you sort of shift that, which is a limiting belief that wasn't serving you, to be where that allowed you to go into what you're doing today, which is a best-selling author of multiple books?
Right. Okay, that's a great question. So when I was seeing these things in my mind, and I had no idea how to create them or how to make them happen, and when I chose to start learning from people who had a much higher education in those specific areas than I did, that was when I began to realize that I had been given, for some reason, I had been given the knowledge of how to teach people to overcome the limiting beliefs that I too had. And it wasn't like this poof, all of a sudden this magic happened. It was as I began to learn from these people, I started to understand things that I had never understood before. And it was so empowering to me to understand it. So what I grasped from all of the research that I did because of my brain injury, I went into total research mode. I had one of the higher eds professors at a university. He said to me, you know, you've done as much research for a PhD in brain research. And I said, you know, I agree 100%. It truly feels like I could be a doctor, you know, because of the brain injury and all the research that I did. So here's what I discovered. Rebecca, when you have an idea or a thought, it first comes into the frontal lobe, okay? So the idea and the thought starts right here. But then you have this target, which comes back here. The target sits right here. So you've got the thought and the target, right? In between are all these thoughts. I don't measure up. I'm not good enough. I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. What in the world am I thinking? Who am I to try to do something like that, right? And our thought can't reach the target because we're having to navigate all of these different things. It reminds me a lot, and I was trying to use this analogy when I was writing my book, Let the Real You Show Up. This analogy came up about a football game. So you've got the defensive players, you've got the football, which is, you know, you're holding on to this idea of getting it to the target, right? And the target, of course, is scoring the goal. Well, if your defense is there, you are having to navigate through all that defense who's got the padding on, and you know they're sitting there and they're psychologically trying to, you know, psych you out and say there's no way you're getting through, right? It's that same type of thing here. Your thought or your idea has got to navigate those notions in your brain, those limiting beliefs, in order to get to that target. Now, what I've learned to do is to be able to think a thought and say, okay, is this one of those limiting beliefs, or is this something that will help me navigate to get to my target goal? When I hear the thought, that's what I do. I assess the thought, and then I say, okay, if it's a limiting belief, thank you very much. I shelf it, and in return, I put in new data. Like, this is part of it. You are worth more than you know, capable of more than you think, and loved more than you can imagine. I mean, incredible words, okay? So shifting the data that goes into your brain, all of that stuff that you have to navigate, those types of things, and it's not just a matter of thinking positive. It truly is a matter of what you have in here is data. It's data that you've been taught. It's data that comes from other people that tell you you're not good enough, you don't measure up, did you make that mistake, oh, you stupid idiot, all these different things. That's not what I want in my brain, and I know that's not what you want. It's not what your listeners want. So being able to input different data and delete what's in there is extremely vitally important for the rest of your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So would you suggest that people, to help eliminate that, one of the things that you said you did was that you went and found people who were more highly educated in a certain realm, and then you learned from that. So did you in order to how did you delete and then replace?
Well, a lot of people do different things like prayer, like meditation, like hypnosis. There's a lot of different methods that you can do. Here is what I did. Every single time I learned a new input, a new data, a new piece of data, whether it was you know, transformation takes place when you learn higher education. Okay, so that's a thought, right? So transformation takes place when you learn higher education. Well, first of all, what's transformation? And I had to break down what is transformation. When I understood the definition of transformation, then I decided, is that something that I want? Yeah, actually it is. All right. So higher education. Well, what does higher education mean? It certainly isn't going to mean going to you know, your local grocery store and looking at an ingredient or whatever. It might mean that I need to learn how to eat better from someone who is a dietitian or someone who really knows about nutrition. So it truly does come down to, for me, it came down to taking the data that's already there and really breaking down every single step or every single new data point that I was learning, and really understanding, is this something that I want? Do I trust the person that's telling me? Is this something that really is in alignment with who I am? The answers are yes. I'm going for it, you know. Now, I have broken this down into a system. And that's why a lot of people come to me for help, because they know that my system works. Obviously, it's not something I can go through here during a quick interview, but I do know that whenever I speak, when I do a live event, then I'm able to share people with what my system is, and it truly does. The effectiveness is incredible. Here's another thing. This is something really a huge tip. Navigating those beliefs will not be able to happen unless you can find forgiveness within. Now, a lot of people might think, no, I'm not forgiving. There's no way. I've been hurt too much. There's no way. But I'm telling you right now, without that integral component in your life to be able to forgive yourself, to be able to forgive other people, it's going to be very difficult for you to ever navigate those things that are going off in your brain, those limiting beliefs going off in your brain. So that's the number one thing that I would start with right there. And that's what a huge component of what I teach in our system is how to forgive people. And it's not really a difficult thing. It comes down to a choice, just like my choice to break down those different data points coming into my brain. It's the same exact thing. You just have to choose what it is that you want.
Okay. So just sort of to segue into the next question, but for what I'm hearing is that the forgiveness or the lack of forgiveness essentially is the mind frick, or the negative beliefs are that's sort of your defense mechanism. And
Right.
The more that you hold on to whatever it is you have to release to sort of accept yourself and your situation and everybody else, the less you're going to be able to replace old thoughts, because those old thoughts are actually the defensemen in the football game.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So the other questions that in the series of questions that you answered for us were around self-belief and the belief in yourself, and is this, can you really separate this the step of forgiveness or replacing limiting beliefs, or are they connected at the hip?
Well, I would say they are connected at the hip, but not a lot of people would probably agree with me on that. The reason I know that they're connected from the hip is because I've worked with people since 2004, and I've seen it over and over and over again. There's not one person that I've ever worked with that hasn't had to work through some kind of forgiveness first before they could actually remove this data that has been inputted into their brain. Because the truth of the matter is, let's just say that you had parents that, and again, you know, I am telling you the truth, generationally speaking, we deal with what our parents dealt with, and they deal with what their parents dealt with, and it's handed down generationally. So even though we think that we're doing things differently than what our parents did, in truth, we are not doing the same things, but yet we're just doing it in a different way. So yes, forgiveness and the different data coming in and what you choose to have in your life definitely is connected at the hip. Otherwise, you're going to still hear you're not good enough. And you can try to input all of this if you want to, but until forgiveness is there and understanding that your parents did the best they could with what they were given, just like you're doing the best that you can with what you've been given. And that's truly where the rubber meets the road. So that is an integral part of it.
So, and then you can walk into sort of self-belief and the belief of being great.
Yes. I feel that once that forgiveness has taken place, you recognize, you know, I mess up. Rebecca, how many times have you maybe, and you don't have to answer this, but this is a hypothetical thing. How many times have you said a criticism about somebody else and then find yourself doing the same thing just a few days later? Has that ever happened to you?
Yes.
Good job. I did say you didn't have to answer it, and then I asked you, does that ever happen to you? Yeah, I mean, that is what happens because that's kind of the way the world works. There are laws within this universe that work that way. We're not meant to sit and criticize other people. We're not meant to be highly competitive against somebody else. We're truly meant to work as a cohesive team together in this universe. We're meant to share the gifts that we've been given and to nurture other people, not to tear them apart, But, the judgment comes when we're unforgiving. And that's truly what it comes down to.
So do you think that you can be successful without passing through these two steps?
Well, I can tell you of all the people that I know, from Tony Robbins to Bob Berg to Felicia Slattery. I mean, all the different people that I know and have learned from, gurus or friends, my associates, other best-selling authors. I don't think there's a one of them that has not forgiven, that has not been able to forgive themselves for having all these things to navigate in their head. And keep in mind, too, I don't care who you are, and I don't care how many millions of dollars you've made, you are still going to deal with stuff because it will keep coming up. Because that's the world. That's the way the world works. You're going to be met with people who will just tick you off for some reason, but you got to step back and come back to being grounded in who you are, saying, there's really something to this that I don't really need to take on their stuff. What I do need to do is to be able to say, it's their thing. It's not mine. I get that they may be criticizing me, but they don't understand me. They don't know who I truly am. And once you can rationalize that, it's easier to forgive that person and move on. You don't have to hang with them. I don't care how much forgiveness, you don't have to hang with them. But you do have to move through that part of it first.
So I'm just going to wrap it up, but if you were going to leave 2 or 3 tips to anybody who's reading your questionnaire or listening to this interview about these issues, around forgiveness, or if you were going through the journey of forgiveness to walk into your power and success, do they need help, or is it just going to happen magically? What would you tell somebody?
I would tell you absolutely get some help. And when I say help, I'm not saying you got to go see a counselor, you got to go see a psychiatrist. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is everybody has these steps that they need to walk through. But can you do it alone? The chances of people doing it alone are slim to none. The greatest thing that you can ever do is really find someone that you can be accountable to. Find someone that you can share. And I'm going to share 3 different tips. Rebecca, you asked me what tips could I share. Here are the 3 key things that I learned that has created the successes that I have today. Vision. You've got to have a vision of to where you want to go. Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be with? What do you want to look like 5 years from now, 2 years from now? What is it that you want in your life? Maybe it's as simple as wanting forgiveness. Maybe you have to ask forgiveness from somebody else. So if that's what it is, have a vision of it. See what it looks like in your mind's eye. The second thing is internal power. You've got to create that internal power in order to go and do whatever it is that you want to do. How do you create internal power? Like I said earlier, people do it in different ways. For me personally, I spend that time reading. I spend that time meditating. I know that until I get grounded, I'm not really able to go out and create that vision that I initially saw. So internal power is extremely powerful, and I take time to do that every single day. The third thing is action. You've got to take action. If you need to forgive somebody, don't wait any longer. Do it today. Seriously, do it today. That's going to help you move forward so much faster, and your shoulders will create that freedom from the burden. And if you need help doing it, get in contact with me. It's what I do. It's what I love. It's who I am. So I truly believe, Rebecca, that vision, power, and action, those 3 things are so key to everybody's life as a business person, as in your professional world, as well as your personal world.
Well, thank you so much. It's been very interesting speaking with you today, Kellie. And if people wanted to contact you, they can go to KellieFrazier.com, which is right under your in your lower third of this picture. I'll just put that up there. And this is Rebecca Happy saying good day. Thank you for joining us for the Success Series of interviews. I'm going to be today with Kellie Frazier of KellieFrazier.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.